Hello, and welcome back to the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Peter Houston, and we're exploring the people and the products powering publishing, both through this podcast and in our adjacent weekly newsletter, which you can sign up for at voices.media. This week I spoke with Juliet Riddell, Head of New Formats at the Financial Times, a title that maybe doesn't reflect exactly what Juliet does. Her focus is very much on video, and Juliet and I spoke following the September release of the 13-minute film Recall Me Maybe, written by comedian David Baddiel and starring Stephen Fry and Game of Thrones Gemma Whelan. Juliet and I spoke about why a news organisation like the FT is making this type of drama, the other films in the FT's Standpoint series, and the power of external collaborations in bringing new perspectives to big issues. But first I asked Juliet about her own background in television.
I actually started at ITV and was there pretty much from about age 21 to 29, so I feel like I cut my teeth at ITV, and then making everything from Come Dine With Me to to more serious like documentaries about children with at Great Ormond Street with rare conditions, but some really fun stuff like Celebrity Fit Club, which actually was a joy to work on.
Come Dine With Me was I haven't watched it for years, but it used to be one of my guilty pleasures on a Sunday afternoon when I just wanted to switch off.
I think that's clearly its success story, isn't it? It's like there's a world of people desperate to just sort of watch other people screw up how to make food and have a laugh.
So, you've been at the FT for what, 7 years or so? 8 years?
It's coming up to 8, which is crazy because this is an actual staff job and I've been freelance my whole career. So I have to say I feel very grateful to be so institutionalized.
You make that sound so attractive.
It really is. It's amazing. You realize why unions exist. You know, having gone from the freelance world to a world in which you can book a holiday, it's pretty great.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me, we spoke a little bit before we came on about your role as FT head of new formats. That doesn't completely tell the story, does it?
No. So what it effectively says is that I do have a very unique position to be able to experiment with how we are telling news stories. And I've taken it quite literally. And since I've been here in 8 years, we have done dramas, which is in some ways the more traditional end. But I've also done no scripted dance shorts, which really is pushing at the boundaries of journalism, and sort of a kind of music video that I did with Nitin Sawhney in a collaboration with the Royal Albert Hall, which was using some of our amazing data journalism. So I definitely am taking the new formats aspect quite literally and experimenting with filmmaking. But it is still rooted in news in the sense that all the films are trying to connect an audience with something that's happening now and that we feel we need to communicate now.
It's not necessarily new formats in the sense there's so many new publishing formats, but it's new ways of using video to tell news stories. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess it's the news story element. I mean, obviously there's been music videos for a long time and there's been dance videos. In some ways, that's actually nothing particularly original from the format. I'm not, as you say, I'm not doing sort of VR or some sort of actual kind of, it goes on YouTube. So in some ways it's a quite traditional format. But yes, it's using a wider range of the tools of filmmaking than you would expect from a newspaper.
I think that music piece that you talk about is really interesting because it is people on stage playing music. But then there's all these overlays of Brexit data and immigration data and all this stuff that's telling the story behind what people might think of the Brexit situation.
But also what I'm proud of, and you might not know it from the piece, but I can tell you the background of that is real in that Nitin Sawhney used to be an accountant. He's really fascinated by numbers. He's really fascinated about maths and data. He cares a lot about immigration, as you might know. And when I came to him with a very broad idea of how can we look at the public opinion around immigration, what's happening with immigration since we've left the EU, he was really stimulated by trying to think about that. And that piece of music was absolutely born from conversations with journalists that had been showing him the data. So the piece starts with a sort of full collection of musicians, and then they gradually leave the stage. And the symbolism of what will happen to our society if we lose the richness of diversity, basically, is the kind of gist. So it really wasn't that there's some data over here and he created a piece of music separately. The two actually were really formed together. And some of the visuals in that, it was an exciting prospect that we could put that graph, that chart literally projected in the room into the Royal Albert Hall. Was really cool.
You said the stuff's on YouTube. It's also on AFT in front of the paywall. You don't have to be a subscriber to see it. There's about 15 pieces. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
And that's over the 7-8 years that you've been.
Not very many, is it?
Well, I look at it and I think, oh my God, how did you do that? So it depends on your perspective. I think that idea that you're telling these stories and it's clearly driven by not necessarily a news agenda as in what's on the front page that day, but it's driven by the big issues.
Yes.
I loved the piece with Margaret Atwood.
It's so clear, isn't it? I think it's really informative. I think that piece should be played in schools. I think, my kids are 15 and 13. I think it's a really helpful exploration of democracy and a good example of how the visuals, the music, the writing all do help us understand things. Again, it's not particularly original. It's like an explainer, it's a kind of diagram. It's quite sort of like on the nose, but it's still, I think, hopefully it's sort of beautiful enough that it elevates it to something beyond something boring.
That idea of it being an explainer is right. I think it does seem like that, but it's the FT and Margaret Atwood. It's not just some random human being on Instagram or TikTok or even YouTube. Everyone that you've done has got someone behind it that's beyond, I was going to say a normal person. That's probably
quite big hitters, aren't there?
Yeah, exactly. And is that a big deal for you to get people involved?
It is. I mean, I think, of course, it helps with reach because you're reaching their audiences, and that obviously has a value. And sort of hype and excitement around it. The Democracy series that Atwood one was part of actually became a book, a really cool little book. And so there was 4 writers for that series, and the book has 11 writers, but the other writers are also epic, like Mary Beard talking about the birth of democracy and whether it really was democracy and women didn't have a vote and things like that. Really great piece. Kaja Kallas, who's the Estonian Prime Minister, writes a piece. UN Ambassador for Women, Adela Raz, wrote a piece. The president of Kosovo writes a piece. Like, incredible people, and yeah, like, what a kind of, in itself, a special thing to bring these people together. And I suppose the act of bringing such sort of a broad range of people, but people that are so valued together, means that we are expressing that this is a special subject, right? We are saying this really matters. These people are not doing it for the money. They're doing it because these issues matter to them.
One of the things that I saw you say before was just talking about this idea of big news stories or current events, but told in a different way. Is that just about access? Is that about opening these stories up to people that maybe normally wouldn't pay attention?
Yeah, and I suppose there is, I feel like I take the responsibility of helping us understand the world quite seriously. So with the latest drama, Recall Me Maybe, I think that the one takeaway from that is that AI hallucinates and that we can't trust what it says. And I think that is a really powerful, important piece to understand. And my parents, who are educated middle-class people, didn't know that. I guess I'm motivated because I think this type of storytelling can have an educational role that other forms of journalism sometimes can't achieve.
Yeah, because it is pure storytelling. It's not old school inverted pyramid of here's the fact and then here's all the background stuff. It's straight in there.
Sometimes it just doesn't land, does it? Like if you were to read, I mean, there's been plenty of brilliant FT articles about ChatGPT or things hallucinating or misinformation, but sometimes you can read that thing and you can see something that says, look, large language models do da 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 da, and it sort of goes over your head. It doesn't quite sort of settle, does it? In terms of like, well, actually, now I'm really kind of trying to understand what will a world look like if I can't tell the difference between, what's true or not true.
So, no spoilers. I don't want to give away the story behind Recall Me Maybe. But the whole point is Stephen Fry, there's that Reach thing, that whole high profile thing, plays an older gentleman who is suffering dementia and goes through this AI therapy, I guess. And the AI therapy surfaces something in his past that everyone's kind of horrified by. And the real story is, did that actually happen? And that idea of AI hallucination all of a sudden becomes really very personal and really very real. It's actually impacting someone's life.
What settled with me for the film, and yeah, that's absolutely what the film does, and it makes you question what impact could that happen in all sorts of ways. But actually, that's it's a relatively extreme example. It's not as extreme as it could be in the film. But what I've been thinking about more is, imagine if the AI just started to tell you that actually you just never really had a great relationship with your kid. You and your daughter just never really got on. She'd always be late, or she was always ungrateful for every Christmas present. And actually, these little adjustments could profoundly affect our lives. And one of the problems with AI at the moment is it does this kind of over affirmative thing, right? Like it kind of reinforces what you say. Well, imagine if you then said to your AI, I think that my daughter maybe doesn't like me anymore. And it says, well, that's a good point. Maybe your daughter doesn't, yeah. So these little shifts.
Tells you what you want to hear.
Yeah, could really have some serious consequences. So the example in the film is more extreme, but actually I think, or more unnerving, is the little bits that we'll never spot.
I have to be honest, I didn't know about FT's standpoint.
That's fine. I don't think many people do.
I came to it, I think, through LinkedIn. And it was Stephen Fry, it was the fact that Stephen Fry's name was on it that I thought, oh wow. And then I look at it and it was written by David Baddiel and Gemma Whelan from Game of Thrones is in there. It's a serious piece of work. And I'm thinking, this is from the FT. What's going on here? Why is the FT putting money behind this? What are they trying to achieve?
They're supportive of the way that this kind of work can reach new audiences, that it does do the job of explaining really critical issues. It is of a high production value that you would hope for from the FT. And actually, the FT, part of its growth is that we do cover all sorts of stories. We have FT Weekend, which has incredible celebrated life and arts coverage, food and drink, interviews with all sorts of different people. The FT isn't just people talking about the markets. And so there's also a value in that we're an organisation that is covering world politics in a really broad way, basically. So I think there is something enticing about confronting people's expectations of what is traditionally understood to be a very traditional legacy news organisation.
And it's not just you going off and giving Stephen Fry or David Baddiel or Gemma Whelan a call. There's a direct link to the FT's journalists, right?
Yes.
I think I read that the FT's AI editor and innovation editor and science editor all collaborated on this piece.
Yeah, so we have these fantastic workshops where when I collaborate with different writers, they come into the FT building normally and we sit round and we really thrash out what the news is, what the ideas are that are hard to land. So there's elements in the film that do come from conversations about more relevant FT issues. So for example, in the film, there's a bit where she says, why is a Heinz tomato ketchup in there? And about the idea that, there's product placement and who's going to fund AI and, where's advertising going to play a part? There's also a bit about ownership, where there's a scene with the husband where he's like, well, who owns it? And again, this huge issues that we're all grappling with in terms of copyright, and the FT is part of that conversation, and journalism is under threat from issues around copyright. So yeah, there are very sort of explicit FT audience related bits of sort of information in there, and part of that has come out of an interaction between David Baddiel and the different editors and their expertise helping sort of shape the script.
Have you had any feedback from, I was going to say FT subscribers, but the fact that it's in front of the paywall, I guess it means it could be anyone.
People seem to really like it. I mean, it's definitely, people are like, oh, it's a bit like Black Mirror, which it is, but it isn't, in the sense that I don't think it's not dystopic entirely. Because I hope it's also raising questions about the fact that AI may well be, a hugely positive contribution to health and medicine. And in the film, I don't think it matters for us to say this, but, it's ambiguous about what they do about the memory and using this service. And I have been doing some panels with David Baddiel about this. And he says, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me telling you, that if this service was available for his dad who had dementia, he would have used it. So I suppose it's not Black Mirror in the sense that it's not all dark.
Yeah, there's, again, without giving too much of the story away, the kind of closing scenes are Stephen Fry having a lot of fun with his granddaughter, right? And the film starts with him kind of losing the plot with his granddaughter.
Exactly.
There's definitely a positivity about it. But I definitely came away from it just with all these questions. Not for you as a filmmaker, but about AI.
Well, that is thrilling for me, because that's the point of these pieces, that they shouldn't answer questions. They should provoke conversations. That's the other thing, going back to your question about why the FT is doing this. As a result of the films, there has been so many brilliant, meaningful events. So I told you that the Democracy series became a book. The book launched at the Hay Festival. So Ruler, the FT editor, did a session at Hay Festival that was packed. The tent was packed. And we had other writers from the films on stage with her. I then went to Lagos to a book festival, the biggest book festival in West Africa, and shared the work and the films and the book. There was a live show at the London International Festival of Theatre. We collaborated with the London Festival of Theatre to do a show with live musicians from Brazil, Rosie Holt, the comedian, a young advocate from Tower Hamlets, who was an amazing young woman. So it became a kind of live show and it was in collaboration with the FT. So I guess in that sense, the new format, it really was to do with this kind of big theatrical piece. And then I guess it's kind of not that hard to see why the FT would do that, because that's bringing the FT brand to people in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, I think looking at it from a publishing perspective, you're sort of joining a lot of dots there. You've got video, which everyone wants to do more video, but then you've also got this social presence, which is how I came to it. And then you've got this live experiential thing where people are actually coming along. And in terms of cut through, in terms of getting through the noise of a news brand trying to compete to be seen, it totally makes sense that way.
So like this film, I'm doing a session at the AI Creative Summit at the BFI, right? And that's a kind of good example. I wouldn't be invited had I not made this film. But it puts us, I suppose, in the room to talk about AI, the creative industry, what was our experience of making the film. It's actually an official AI summit hosted by the FT. And you won't be surprised that we're screening the film there. But that's a great opportunity, because actually then I'm in the room with people that are from the technology side of things, and there also might be policymakers. So I suppose it's the kind of that unique spot the FT has of kind of reaching the CEOs as well as us normal folk.
I don't want to get deep into AI other than what we've talked about in the context of the film, but is it something that you can see yourself using as part of your process?
That's a really interesting question, and I think all news organisations are grappling with how to do it carefully, aren't they? So in the film, we use AI to recreate these scenes with Stephen Fry. And that was a really good learning curve for us as the filmmakers, because in some ways it's scarily easy. In other ways, it was scarily hard. Because some things you can do really easy with AI, but getting people to kind of lip sync to exactly the words that you want to say actually can be quite difficult. Using famous faces doing uncomfortable things is actually pretty difficult. So creating the sort of action sequences that were very specific was actually really difficult. I think that we do have to use AI because otherwise we'll be left behind. But it's certainly a complex road, and I don't really have an answer for it because I feel like I'm very much still learning.
I spoke to Sean Cornwell, the chief executive of Immediate Media, and one of the things that they talk about is AI assisted rather than AI generated. And I think that's interesting, whereas AI generated is a little bit scary, which is kind of the message of your film, right?
Well, we have, a board here making sure that we're doing things ethically. So we obviously wouldn't use AI in a way that would trick an audience into believing something that was real that wasn't real. And that's partly why we landed on quite a crude device in the film where all the AI is in color and then what we thought of the real is in black and white. And that was partly a response to sort of wanting to distinguish between what was real and what was real. And then we play with that at the end of the film, don't we? And we put a little sort of warning saying that we used AI. So, I mean, I don't know. We're learning as we go.
Definitely. I think it's the honesty thing is the most important. So what's next? What's your next project? Have you got one?
Yes, I actually have another AI related film that is, I hope, due to publish in January, which is about imagining how AI might work for good and asking people to contribute to that conversation. Because I think we are in a place where we're scared of AI, we don't really understand it enough. And so we're not, as citizens of all different types, able to kind of help articulate what we do want from AI in the future. So Madhu, the AI editor, is going to present us with 3 different descriptions of examples of how AI can help us and throw to the audience, can they contribute what their thoughts are? And I really like the idea that this film, again, is a provocation of like, well, what can we imagine? And actually the imagination being built on some facts that we can give you because we're the FT and we can give you some really concrete, journalistically checked examples. But actually the use of imagination in this context is really valuable. So it's almost like very on the nose about this kind of how I'm using creativity and news together and showing that the two together actually has constructive function. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I love the fact that you're bringing the audience into that because you're absolutely right. I think we're all kind of schizophrenic. Or we love it because it helps us transcribe or it helps us fix email inboxes or whatever it is. And then on the other side of things, we're terrified that it's going to take our jobs or set off a bomb or something.
We haven't learned from the sort of social media revolution, have we? It just sort of happened to us and we were guinea pigs that got swept along. And if there's any hope for this next phase, I think we have to sort of put our big pants on and sort of try and lean into the conversation a bit more.
That's the best line ever to end an interview on. Get a big pants on.
And that's where the FT can help you, right? Is that we can be like, these are 3 examples and they come from the AI editor, These are things that we've checked and that are in development. But, we're still at that point where imagining is crucial because we don't want to suddenly find ourselves in 10 years' time somewhere that we really didn't anticipate.
Thanks so much to Juliet for speaking to us. If you want to see more of her work for the FT, go to ft.com/ft-standpoint or search FT Standpoint on YouTube. And don't forget, we have a write-up of the key learnings from this interview on voices.media, or drop it into your inbox if you've signed up to the publisher newsletter, also on voices.media. We'll be back next week with another look at the people and products powering publishing's future. Until then, keep up with all things Media Voices by following us on LinkedIn and subscribing to the publisher newsletter over on voices.media.